He was digging through garbage just to feed his daughter, but the woman watching him was about to reveal a secret that would shatter everything he thought he knew about her and his own life. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The bitter winter wind whipped through the nearly empty mall parking lot as Jack Matthews pulled his beat-up sedan into a far corner, away from the few remaining cars. The mall's closing time was approaching, and the fading daylight cast long shadows across the asphalt. Jack's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. "Why are we stopping here, Dad?" Emily asked from the back seat, her voice tinged with curiosity. She hugged her worn backpack close to her chest, the same one she'd had since second grade. Jack's throat felt tight as he looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Her bright eyes met his, and he forced a smile. "Just need to check something real quick, sweetheart. Stay in the car where it's warm, okay?" Emily nodded, but her eyes held that knowing look that sometimes made Jack's heart ache. She was too perceptive for her age, too aware of the strain in his voice when he said everything was fine. Jack stepped out of the car, the cold air biting through his thin jacket. He'd pawned his winter coat last week to pay for Emily's school supplies. The world felt heavy on his shoulders as he walked toward the back of the mall, where large industrial dumpsters lined the loading dock area. His footsteps echoed in the empty space, each step feeling like lead. The smell of rotting food and garbage grew stronger as he approached. Jack's stomach churned, but not from the smell, from shame. He'd never imagined he'd end up here, searching through trash for something to feed his daughter. From her security booth near the loading dock, Evie Sinclair sat watching the scene unfold through the glass windows. The booth's harsh fluorescent light cast a pale glow around her as she observed the man approaching the dumpsters. Something about his defeated posture made her chest tighten. Jack glanced around nervously before approaching the first dumpster. His hands trembled as he lifted the heavy lid, the metal creaking in protest. The sound seemed to echo across the empty parking lot, making him wince. Inside, he could see discarded packaging from the food court, some still containing half-eaten meals. Back in the car, Emily pressed her face against the window, watching her father's silhouette in the growing darkness. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, trying to stay warm as the car's heat slowly dissipated. She didn't understand exactly what her dad was doing, but she knew things hadn't been right since they'd left their old house. Jack's fingers, numb from the cold, carefully sorted through the garbage. His pride screamed at him to stop, to walk away. But the gnawing emptiness in Emily's stomach that she tried so hard to hide drove him forward. Near the bottom of the pile, he found a barely touched sandwich in its original wrapper and what looked like an almost full container of French fries. The security camera's red light blinked steadily as Evie watched the man's methodical movements. She'd seen desperate people before in her years working security, but something about this man was different. The careful way he moved, the frequent glances back toward his car. This wasn't someone looking to cause trouble. This was someone at the end of his rope. Jack's eyes burned with unshed tears as he carefully wrapped his findings in a clean napkin he'd found. The shame threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed it down. Emily needed to eat. That was all that mattered right now. The walk back to the car felt longer than before. Each step reminded him of how far he'd fallen, from successful business owner to digging through garbage. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. Emily sat up straighter as her father approached the car. She watched as he wiped his hands on his pants before opening the driver's side door, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the faint smell of garbage. "Here you go, sweetheart," Jack said softly, trying to keep his voice steady as he handed her the wrapped bundle. "It's not much, but it's something." Emily took the package carefully, her small fingers brushing against his cold ones. "Thanks, Dad," she said, her voice quiet and understanding in a way that made Jack's heart break a little more. From her booth, Evie continued to watch as the man settled back into his car. Her hand hovered over the radio that would connect her to mall security, but she remained still. Something held her back from intervening, even as her heart ached for the scene she'd just witnessed. The sound of Emily unwrapping the food seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet car. Jack couldn't bring himself to look at her, focusing instead on the dashboard where the gaslight had been blinking for the past 2 days. "Do you want some, Dad?" Emily asked, holding out half of the sandwich. Jack shook his head, managing a small smile. "No, honey, you eat it. I'm not hungry right now." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but he'd rather go hungry himself than take food from his daughter. In the security booth, Evie watched as the car's interior light illuminated the small family. The girl's face was visible through the windshield as she ate, while the father sat motionless, staring straight ahead. The scene stirred something deep within her, memories of her own fall from grace, making her hands tremble slightly. Emily ate slowly, savoring each bite in a way no 9-year-old should have to. Jack listened to the soft sounds of her eating, each one a reminder of how completely he'd failed as a provider. The French fries were cold and slightly soggy, but Emily didn't complain. The mall's exterior lights clicked on automatically as dusk deepened into evening, casting harsh shadows across the parking lot. Jack sat there, feeling the weight of Evie's unseen gaze from the security booth, though he didn't know she was there. His shoulders slumped under the invisible burden of shame and desperation. Emily finished eating in silence, carefully folding the wrapper and placing it in the small plastic bag they kept in the car for trash. The simple action, so adult-like and conscious, made Jack's throat tighten again. She shouldn't have to be so careful, so aware of their circumstances at her age. The car sat idle in the darkening parking lot, its occupants frozen in a tableau of quiet desperation. From her position in the security booth, Evie continued her silent vigil, her heart heavy with empathy for the scene unfolding before her. Evie sat in her security booth, her worn vinyl chair creaking under her weight as she leaned forward against the smudged window. Her own sandwich lay untouched on the small desk beside her coffee thermos, the steam from her drink long since dissipated into the cool night air. The fluorescent light above buzzed intermittently, casting harsh shadows across her weathered face as she watched the father and daughter in their battered sedan. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene unfolding in the parking lot below. The little girl was eating with such deliberate care, breaking off tiny pieces of whatever her father had found and chewing slowly, as if savoring each morsel. Her small hands held the food like it was made of gold. Meanwhile, the father remained motionless in the driver's seat, his broad shoulders hunched inward, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. Even from this distance, Evie could see the defeat radiating from every line of his body. The image seared itself into her consciousness with painful clarity. During her countless night shifts over the past 3 years, she'd witnessed her share of desperate souls wandering through the mall's grounds. Teenagers running from troubled homes, elderly people seeking warmth on cold nights, the occasional vagrant looking for shelter. But something about this pair struck her differently, hitting a nerve she'd thought had been numbed long ago. Maybe it was the methodical way the father had searched through that dumpster, his movements careful and deliberate rather than frantic. Or perhaps it was how he'd taken such care to wrap whatever he'd found in what looked like napkins from the food court, creating a makeshift meal for his daughter. This wasn't someone looking to cause trouble or take advantage of the system. This was a man who'd been pushed to the very edge of his options, forced to swallow his pride and dignity just to feed his child. Her gaze drifted to her own dinner, sitting forgotten on the desk. She'd prepared it that morning in her tiny studio apartment, turkey and cheese with crisp lettuce on whole wheat bread. Nothing elaborate, but still a proper meal. She'd even added a thin slice of tomato and a touch of mustard, small luxuries that now felt almost obscene given what she'd just witnessed. The sandwich was wrapped neatly in wax paper, tied with a small piece of string, a habit from her childhood that she'd never quite shaken. Looking at it now, her stomach churned with something deeper than hunger. How could she possibly eat, knowing that just outside her window, a father and daughter were sharing scraps from a garbage bin? The very thought made her throat close up with emotion. Taking a shaky breath, Evie pushed herself up from her chair. The metal legs scraped loudly against the linoleum floor as she shoved it back, the sound echoing through the small booth. She reached for her sandwich with one hand and her regulation flashlight with the other, though the bright sodium lights illuminating the parking lot made the flashlight unnecessary. Her fingers trembled slightly as she gripped both items, her heart hammering against her ribs. The automatic door hissed open as she approached, and the December air hit her like a physical blow. Her thin security uniform, a polyester shirt, and matching pants that had seen better days offered little protection against the bitter cold. The fabric rustled as she walked, each step deliberate and measured. She could feel the chill seeping through her clothes, but the discomfort barely registered. Her mind was focused entirely on the family in the car. Her footsteps echoed across the vast expanse of asphalt, each sound seeming amplified in the stillness of the night. The parking lot stretched out before her like a concrete ocean, dotted with islands of yellow light from the overhead lamps. As she drew closer to the sedan, she could make out more details. The rust eating away at the wheel wells, the rear bumper held on with duct tape, the way the driver's seat sagged under the weight of its occupant. Jack must have spotted her approach in his rearview mirror because she saw his entire body go rigid, his spine straightened against the seat back, and his hands moved to grip the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Even from behind, she could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly, as if preparing for confrontation or trouble. Emily turned in her seat as well, pressing her small face against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered out with wide, curious eyes. When Evie reached the driver's side door, she lifted her hand and tapped gently on the window with her knuckles. The sound was soft, almost tentative, nothing that could be construed as threatening or aggressive. Jack hesitated for what felt like an eternity, his silhouette frozen behind the glass. Finally, she heard the mechanical whir of the window rolling down, revealing his face in the harsh artificial light. Up close, the exhaustion was even more apparent. Deep lines were etched around his eyes, and his skin had the grayish pallor of someone who'd been living on stress and little sleep for far too long. His dark hair was disheveled, and she could see the shadow of several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. But it was his eyes that really got to her. They held the kind of weariness that went soul deep, the look of a man who'd been carrying the world on his shoulders for too long. "Evening," Evie said, her voice barely above a whisper. She made a conscious effort to keep her tone warm and non-threatening, the way she might speak to a frightened animal. "I couldn't help but notice you folks out here." She held up her sandwich, the wax paper crinkling softly. "I packed way more food than I need tonight. Would you mind taking this off my hands?" The effect was immediate and heartbreaking. Jack's face flushed a deep crimson that was visible even under the harsh parking lot lights. His jaw clenched, and she could see a muscle jumping in his cheek as he struggled with his response. "No, thank you," he said quickly, his voice rough and strained. "We're fine. Just stopping for a moment to rest before heading home." The lie hung between them, transparent and painful. Evie's heart clenched as she watched him struggle to maintain his dignity, to keep up the pretense that everything was under control. Behind him, Emily leaned forward from the back seat, her small hands gripping the edge of the front seat as she looked at Evie with an expression that was far too knowing for a child her age. There was hope there, yes, but also a resignation that made Evie's chest tight with grief. "Please," Evie said, her voice growing softer, more insistent. "I really won't be able to finish it all. It would honestly just go to waste otherwise, and that seems like such a shame." She extended the sandwich a little further, close enough that he could smell the turkey and cheese through the paper wrapping. Jack's grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles stood out like white ridges against his skin. She could see the internal war playing out across his features, pride battling with desperation, shame wrestling with the practical need to feed his daughter. His mouth opened slightly as if to refuse again, but before he could speak, Emily's voice cut through the tension. "Thank you, Mommy." The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that seemed to spread through all three of them. Evie felt the air leave her lungs in a rush, as if someone had punched her in the stomach. This simple, innocent mistake hit her with the force of a physical blow, awakening emotions she'd thought were long buried. She watched Jack's face crumple for just an instant before he managed to get his expression under control. His eyes squeezed shut briefly, and when he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Emily's face had gone pale with mortification as she realized what she'd said. "I'm sorry," the little girl whispered, her voice so small it was barely audible. She shrank back into the depths of the car seat, trying to make herself invisible. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry, Daddy." "It's okay, sweetheart," Evie managed to say, though her own voice came out shakier than she'd intended. The words seemed to stick in her throat, and she had to clear it twice before she could continue. "It's perfectly okay. No harm done at all." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Jack stared straight ahead through the windshield, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't bring himself to say. The streetlights cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the hollow beneath his eyes. Evie could practically feel the shame radiating from him in waves. Finally, he turned to look at her directly, and she was struck by the raw vulnerability in his gaze. For a moment, all his defenses were down, and she could see straight through to the broken man underneath, a father who would do anything for his child, even if it meant sacrificing his own pride and dignity. "I appreciate the offer, I really do," he said quietly, each word carefully measured. "But we really shouldn't take your food. You work hard for what you have and—" "Please," Evie interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. She took a small step closer to the car, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his lower lip trembled almost imperceptibly. "I need you to understand something. I've been exactly where you are right now. Maybe not in the same circumstances, but I know what it feels like when your whole world comes crashing down around you. Jack's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features. His eyebrows drew together slightly as he studied her face, perhaps looking for any trace of condescension or pity. What he found instead was genuine understanding, the kind that could only come from personal experience. Sometimes, Evie continued, her voice growing steadier as she spoke, the bravest thing we can do is let other people help us. There's no shame in accepting kindness when it's offered freely. In fact, it takes real courage. The words seemed to penetrate something deep inside Jack. She watched as his shoulders gradually relaxed, not in defeat, but as if some of the crushing weight he'd been carrying had finally begun to lift. His breathing became less shallow, and the rigid set of his jaw softened slightly, very slowly, as if the movement caused him physical pain. Jack reached out and took the sandwich from her hands. His fingers brushed against hers for just a moment, and she could feel how cold they were, how they trembled with exhaustion and emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, the words so quiet they were almost lost in the night air. But Evie heard them clearly, and she could tell they carried the weight of far more than simple gratitude for food. They held acknowledgement, relief, and perhaps the first glimmer of hope he'd felt in a very long time. Emily watched the exchange from the back seat, her eyes moving between her father and Evie like a spectator at a tennis match. The embarrassment from her earlier slip had faded, replaced by something softer and more complex. There was curiosity there, and a kind of cautious optimism that made Evie's heart squeeze painfully in her chest. Sensing that Jack needed space to process what had just happened, Evie took a deliberate step back from the car. She watched as he unwrapped the sandwich with trembling hands, his movements careful and reverent. The wax paper crinkled loudly in the quiet night as he opened it, revealing the simple meal inside. Without hesitation, he broke the sandwich in half, passing the larger portion back to Emily with the same gentle care he'd shown when wrapping the food from the dumpster. The shame was still there, written in the downward tilt of his head and the way he couldn't quite bring himself to meet her eyes directly. But alongside it, she could see something else beginning to take root, maybe relief, or perhaps just the dawning realization that not everyone who witnessed his struggle would judge him for it. "I should get back to my rounds," Evie said softly, not wanting to prolong his discomfort any more than necessary. The lie came easily. She had no rounds to make, no pressing duties that couldn't wait. But she understood that dignity sometimes required the pretense of normalcy. She took another step back, then added with genuine warmth, "You take good care of yourselves, okay?" Jack nodded slowly, still not looking directly at her, but somehow managing to convey volumes in that simple gesture. "Thank you," he said again, and this time his voice was stronger, more steady. "Thank you for understanding." As Evie turned to walk back toward the mall, she heard the soft murmur of voices from the car behind her. Jack's low rumble and Emily's higher, sweeter tones. She didn't turn around, but she could picture them sharing the sandwich, father and daughter finding a moment of peace in the midst of their struggle. The image followed her all the way back to her security booth, where her cold coffee and empty desk were waiting. The mall parking lot felt colder now, even with the heater running in their old sedan. Jack glanced at Emily in the passenger seat, his heart aching as she carefully divided the sandwich Evie had given them into 2 parts. "Here, Daddy," Emily said, holding out the bigger half. "You need to eat too." Jack shook his head, forcing a smile. "You eat it, sweetheart. I had a big lunch at work today." The lie tasted bitter in his mouth, but he couldn't bear to take food from his daughter. Emily's eyes, so much like her mother's, studied him with that uncanny perception that sometimes made him wonder if she could see right through him. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure." Jack reached over and smoothed her hair the way he used to when she was smaller. "Emily, honey, I need you to know something." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We're going through a rough patch right now, but everything's going to be okay. I promise." Emily nodded, taking small, deliberate bites of the sandwich. "I know, Daddy. We're tough, remember? That's what you always say." Jack's throat tightened. "That's right, baby. We're tough." He started the car, the engine protesting slightly before turning over. "Let's head home. It's getting late, and you have school tomorrow." That night, after tucking Emily into bed in their small apartment, Jack sat at their tiny kitchen table, staring at bills spread out before him. The numbers seemed to mock him, growing larger every time he looked at them. The rent was due in a week, and they were already behind on utilities. Sleep refused to come. He tossed and turned on the old couch he'd been using as a bed since they downsized, his mind racing with calculations and worried thoughts. Around dawn, he made the call to his current job at the warehouse. "Hey, Mike?" "Yeah, it's Jack Matthews." He coughed, trying to sound convincingly ill. "I'm not feeling well today. Think I caught something." The lie sat heavy in his stomach, but he needed time to figure things out. After dropping Emily at school, Jack found himself back at the mall. He needed to look for additional work, something, anything, to supplement his warehouse job. The morning sun cast long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot as he walked toward the entrance. His old dress shoes, the ones he'd worn when he owned his business, scuffed and worn now. Near the food court, he ran into Tom, one of the maintenance workers he'd met during his previous visits to the mall. Tom was sweeping the floor, his gray uniform neat despite the early hour. "Jack, haven't seen you around lately," Tom said, leaning on his broom. Jack managed a weak smile. "Yeah, been busy trying to keep everything together. How's the warehouse working out?" "It's—" Jack's voice cracked slightly. He glanced around, making sure they were alone, unaware that Evie was within earshot at her security station. "It's not enough, Tom. Everything fell apart so fast after Sarah died. The business, our savings. I tried to keep it together, but—" Tom's face softened with understanding. "The economy's rough right now. Lot of small businesses going under. I had to let all my employees go, people who'd worked with me for years." Jack ran a hand through his hair, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. "Now I can barely make rent. Emily, she tries to act like everything's fine, but she deserves so much better than this," than dumpster diving for dinner. From her position near the security monitors, Evie's heart clenched. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but Jack's words carried clearly in the empty mall. "I've been applying everywhere," Jack continued, his voice low and strained. "But no one wants to hire a failed business owner. They look at my resume and see someone who couldn't make it work. And they're right." He laughed bitterly. "You know what the worst part is? Emily still believes in me. She still thinks I can fix everything. I don't have the heart to tell her that her dad's a complete failure." Tom shook his head. "You're not a failure, Jack. You're trying. That counts for something. Try telling that to the bill collectors." Jack checked his watch. "I should go. Need to check a few more places before picking Emily up from school. She can't know I missed work today. She worries enough as it is." As Jack walked away, Evie watched him through the security cameras. His shoulders were bent as if carrying an invisible weight, but his head was held high, the posture of a man determined to keep his dignity intact, even as his world crumbled around him. She understood that posture all too well. She'd worn it herself not so long ago. In her small security booth, Evie sat back in her chair, thinking about the proud father who would rather dig through garbage than let his daughter see him break down. She thought about Emily's innocent, "Thank you, Mommy," from the night before, and how those words had pierced straight through to her heart. The morning light streamed through the mall skylight, casting patterns on the floor where Tom had resumed his sweeping. Evie watched Jack's figure disappear through the main entrance, noticing how he straightened his shoulders and lifted his chin just before stepping outside, transforming back into the strong father his daughter believed him to be. The next evening, Jack found himself back at the mall, this time with Emily in tow. She had homework to finish, and their apartment's electricity had been cut off that morning. The food court's bright lights and free tables seemed like a better option than sitting in the dark. Evie noticed them from her security station. She watched as Jack helped Emily set up her books, his face tight with worry, but his movements gentle. After a few minutes of internal debate, she grabbed her thermos of coffee and headed their way. "Mind if I join you?" Evie asked, gesturing to an empty chair. Jack looked up, startled. Emily's face brightened. "Hi, sandwich lady," she chirped. "Emily," Jack said quietly. "That's not very polite." Evie laughed, settling into the chair. "I've been called worse. I'm Evie." She extended her hand to Emily, who shook it with enthusiasm. "I'm Emily Matthews, and this is my dad, Jack." Jack nodded, looking uncomfortable but managing a small smile. "Thanks again for yesterday. That was kind of you." "Sometimes kindness is all we have to give," Evie said, pouring coffee into the thermos cap. She offered it to Jack, who hesitated before accepting. Emily bent over her math homework, her pencil scratching against paper. Jack watched her for a moment, his expression softening. "She's so much like her mother," he said quietly, almost to himself. Evie waited, sensing there was more to come. "Sarah, my wife, she used to help Emily with homework every night." Jack's fingers tightened around the coffee cap. "She was always so patient, could explain things in a way that made sense. I try, but—" He shook his head. "When did you lose her?" Evie asked gently. 2 years ago. Cancer." Jack's voice cracked slightly. "It happened so fast. One day she was fine, the next." He took a sip of coffee, using the moment to compose himself. The medical bills piled up. I tried to keep the business running, but between hospital visits and taking care of Emily, everything just fell apart. Emily glanced up briefly, then returned to her homework, though her pencil moved more slowly now. I had a construction supply company, Jack continued, his voice low. Nothing fancy, but it was successful. We had 15 employees, good people. I had to let them all go when things got bad. Couldn't even pay their final month's salary. The shame in his voice was palpable. Evie nodded, understanding written across her face. Loss has a way of taking more than just the person we love. You sound like you know something about that. She was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee. I do. Different circumstances, but similar pain. She glanced around the nearly empty food court. Would you believe I used to be worth $2 billion? Jack's eyebrows shot up. What? Inherited it from my grandfather's tech company. I was living the high life, mansion, private jets, the works. Her smile turned bitter. Then I trusted the wrong person. My business partner, someone I thought was family, orchestrated a massive fraud scheme. When it all came crashing down, I lost everything. My reputation, my friends, my sense of security. That must have been hard, Jack said, and Evie appreciated that there was no judgment in his voice, just understanding. The money wasn't even the worst part, she admitted. It was the shame. Walking into stores where I used to spend thousands, now barely able to afford a coffee, seeing old friends cross the street to avoid me, having everyone assume I must have been in on the scheme. Emily had stopped pretending to do her homework now, listening openly to their conversation. How did you handle it? Jack asked. One day at a time. Started over completely. Took this security job because it was the only place that didn't Google my name before hiring. Evie smiled at Emily. But you know what? It taught me what really matters. And it's not the money or the status. Jack nodded slowly. I keep telling myself that as long as Emily's healthy and safe, nothing else matters. But then the bills come. And he trailed off, looking at his daughter. Daddy, Emily said suddenly, I don't mind that we don't have much money. I just don't like seeing you sad all the time. Jack's face crumpled for a moment before he pulled Emily into a tight hug. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm trying to be stronger. You are strong, Evie said firmly. Both of you are. And you know what? Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we need help. Jack pulled back from Emily, wiping his eyes quickly. That's not something I'm very good at. Neither was I, Evie admitted. Still not really. But I learned the hard way that trying to carry everything alone just makes the load heavier. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the mall's ambient noise filling the space between them. Emily returned to her homework, but she seemed more relaxed now, as if a weight had lifted from her small shoulders. It's nice, Jack said finally, talking to someone who understands. Most people either pity you or judge you. There's no in-between. The worst is when they try to give advice, Evie added. Have you tried not being poor? As if it never occurred to us? Jack laughed, a genuine laugh that seemed to surprise even him. Or just start another business. With what capital exactly? My personal favorite was, everything happens for a reason. Evie rolled her eyes. As if that helps pay the electric bill. Emily looked up from her math. Our electricity got turned off today, she said matter-of-factly. But Daddy said we could pretend we're camping. Jack's face flushed red, but Evie just nodded. Camping's fun. Although, she added carefully, the community center on 5th Street has emergency assistance programs for camping alternatives. Jack started to shake his head, but stopped when he saw Emily trying to read by the dim food court lights. Maybe I'll look into that. All done, Emily announced, closing her textbook. Good job, sweetie. Jack gathered their things, standing reluctantly. We should get going. Thank you, Evie, for everything. Anytime, she replied, and meant it. You know where to find me. As she watched them walk away, Emily's small hand in Jack's larger one, Evie felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The warmth of a genuine connection. In Jack's story, she saw reflections of her own journey, and in his strength, she found echoes of the resilience she'd discovered in herself. The next few days brought a subtle shift in Jack's routine. Instead of hurrying past the mall's security booth with his eyes down, he found himself slowing his pace, offering a small nod to Evie when their eyes met. Sometimes, she'd wave back with a gentle smile that reminded him he wasn't completely alone in his struggles. One evening, as Jack walked Emily through the mall after another failed job interview, she tugged at his sleeve. Dad, can we get ice cream? Her hopeful eyes made his heart ache. He patted his pocket, knowing exactly how many dollars remained. Not enough. Maybe next time, sweetie, he said, trying to keep his voice light. How about we window shop instead? You can show me what flavors you'd pick. Emily's shoulders slumped slightly, but she nodded. Okay, Dad. She squeezed his hand, and Jack wondered if she understood more than she let on. From her position near the security monitors, Evie watched the scene unfold. She noticed how Jack's shoulders tensed when they passed the ice cream shop, how he tried to distract Emily with animated gestures toward other store windows. The familiar ache of empathy bloomed in her chest. Later that night, after Emily had gone to bed, Jack returned to the mall. He'd been doing this more often lately, walking the corridors during Evie's night shift, finding comfort in the quiet conversations they shared. You're getting better at smiling through it, Evie said as Jack approached her booth, but I can still see how much it hurts. Jack leaned against the wall, exhaling heavily. Emily wanted ice cream today. Such a simple thing, right? But I couldn't even give her that. You're giving her something more valuable, Evie replied, her voice gentle but firm. You're showing her what real strength looks like. Jack scoffed. Strength? I'm digging through dumpsters to feed my kid. You're doing whatever it takes to take care of her, Evie corrected. That's not weakness, Jack. That's love. Their conversation was interrupted by Mr. Peterson, the mall's maintenance supervisor, who was making his nightly rounds. He paused when he saw Jack, recognition flickering across his face. Say, aren't you the fellow I've seen around here lately? Mr. Peterson asked, his weathered face creasing with interest. We've got an opening on the janitorial staff. Second shift, decent benefits. Nothing fancy, but it's steady work. Jack felt his face grow warm. The thought of pushing a mop around the same mall where he used to shop as a successful business owner made his stomach clench. I appreciate the offer, but he'd love to hear more about it, Evie cut in, giving Jack a pointed look. Wouldn't you, Jack? Mr. Peterson smiled, reaching into his pocket for an application form. Well, here you go. Fill this out and bring it back tomorrow. We could use someone reliable. After the supervisor walked away, Jack stared at the application, his fingers crumpling the edges slightly. I can't do this, Evie. I used to own my own business. I had employees. Now I'm supposed to clean up after people? Evie stood up from her chair, her eyes meeting his with unexpected intensity. Let me tell you something, Jack Matthews. When I lost everything, do you know what saved me? It wasn't pride. It wasn't holding on to what I used to be. It was accepting that sometimes we have to rebuild from the ground up. She gestured around the empty mall. You think I dreamed of being a night security guard? I used to have an office on the top floor of a skyscraper. But this job? It gave me back my dignity. It gave me purpose. And most importantly, it gave me a paycheck. Jack looked down at the application again, smoothing out the wrinkled corners. Emily deserves better than a janitor for a father. Emily deserves a father who doesn't give up, Evie said softly. This isn't the end of your story, Jack. It's just a new chapter. Take the job. Start rebuilding. Show Emily that there's no shame in honest work. A long moment passed as Jack considered her words. He thought about Emily's brave smile when he'd said no to the ice cream, about the dwindling dollars in his wallet, about the stack of unpaid bills at home. Got a pen? He finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. Evie smiled, pulling one from her desk drawer. That's the spirit. Besides, she added with a gentle nudge to his shoulder, the employee discount at the ice cream shop isn't half bad. Jack sat down in the chair Evie offered and began filling out the application. Each line felt like both a surrender and a victory. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote down his previous employment history, but he kept going. You know what I've learned? Evie said as she watched him write. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered, whether it's a sandwich, a job, or just someone to talk to. Jack paused, pen hovering over the paper. I'm not used to needing help. None of us are, Evie replied. But we all need it sometimes. And Jack, this isn't help, it's an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. As Jack finished the application, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't exactly hope, not yet, but maybe it was the first step toward it. He looked at the completed form, his neat handwriting filling every line, and handed it to Evie for safekeeping until morning. Thank you, he said quietly, not just for this, but for. He gestured vaguely, unable to find the right words. Evie nodded, understanding what he couldn't say. Bring this back first thing tomorrow. And Jack, hold your head up when you do. There's nothing here to be ashamed of. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jack stood in the mall's maintenance room, clutching his new uniform. The dark blue fabric felt rough against his fingers. The name tag read Jack M. in simple block letters, a small reminder of how far he'd fallen from being a business owner. "Morning, friend." A cheerful voice startled him. An older man with silver hair and kind eyes stepped into the room. "I'm Pete, head custodian. Welcome to the team." Jack managed a weak smile. "Thanks, I'm Jack." Pete showed him around the supply closet, pointing out the cleaning supplies, mops, and various equipment they'd be using. "Don't worry too much about getting everything perfect on day one. We all started somewhere." As Pete demonstrated how to properly use the floor buffer, Jack caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished mall window. The uniform hung a bit loose on his frame. He'd lost weight from skipping meals to make sure Emily had enough to eat. His face looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent worrying about bills. "The morning shift starts with the food court," Pete explained, handing Jack a mop. "Gotta get it clean before the restaurants open." Jack pushed the mop across the food court floor, his movements mechanical. Each stroke felt like an admission of failure. A few early morning mall walkers passed by, their shoes squeaking on the wet floor. He kept his head down, hoping nobody would recognize him. From her security booth, Evie watched Jack work. She noticed how he attacked each task with determination, even though his shoulders were slumped with exhaustion. When a toddler spilled their juice near the playground area, Jack was there within minutes, cleaning it up thoroughly, and even making the little one laugh with a gentle joke. The morning stretched into afternoon. Jack's back ached from bending over to pick up trash and scrub stubborn stains. His hands were raw from the cleaning solutions, but he didn't complain. Every time he felt like giving up, he thought of Emily's smile and pushed through. During his lunch break, Jack sat alone in the break room, unwrapping a simple sandwich he'd made that morning. The door opened, and Pete walked in, settling into a chair across from him. "You're doing good work out there," Pete said, opening his own lunch. "Most new folks complain all day, but you just keep at it." Jack nodded, grateful for the kind words, but unsure how to respond. "Just trying to do the job right. That's the spirit," Pete smiled. "You know, I've been doing this for 20 years. Started right after my factory closed down. Thought it was the end of the world back then." He took a bite of his sandwich. Turns out it was just a new beginning. The afternoon brought new challenges. A backed-up toilet in the men's room tested Jack's resolve, but he handled it without complaint. When an elderly woman dropped her shopping bags, scattering items everywhere, Jack stopped his cleaning to help her gather everything up. From her position at the security monitors, Evie noticed these small acts of kindness. She watched as Jack helped a lost child find their mother, took extra care cleaning around a disabled person's wheelchair, and stayed late to finish buffing a particularly difficult section of floor. As the mall began to wind down for the day, Jack's muscles screamed in protest. His feet felt like lead, and his lower back throbbed. But there was also a strange sense of satisfaction in seeing the gleaming floors and spotless windows, tangible proof that he'd accomplished something today. "Hey," Evie's voice came from behind him as he was storing his cleaning supplies. "Saw you working hard out there." Jack turned, trying to hide his embarrassment at being seen in the janitor's uniform. "Yeah, well, gotta earn that paycheck." "You did more than that," she said softly. "I saw how you helped that old lady with her bags and the lost kid. That's not in the job description." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just seemed like the right thing to do." "That's exactly what I mean," Evie smiled. "You've got integrity, Jack. That's worth more than any job title." As Jack walked to his car, his body ached, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in weeks. He had earned an honest day's pay. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Emily was waiting at Mrs. Johnson's house next door, where she stayed after school. The moment she saw him, she bounded down the front steps, her backpack bouncing. "Daddy, Daddy, you'll never believe what happened at school today." Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she threw her arms around him. Jack winced slightly as his sore muscles protested, but he hugged her back, trying to match her enthusiasm. "What happened, sweetie?" "I got picked to be the lead in our class play. I'm going to be Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz." Emily twirled around, her worn sneakers scuffing the sidewalk. "Mrs. Thompson said I did the best audition she's ever seen." "That's wonderful, honey." Jack forced brightness into his voice, pushing aside thoughts of how he'd managed to afford a costume. Right now, Emily's joy was what mattered. "You'll be the best Dorothy ever. And guess what else?" she continued as they walked to their car. "Sarah invited me to her birthday party next Saturday. There's going to be a magician and everything." Jack's stomach tightened, another expense he couldn't afford. But looking at Emily's shining face, he couldn't bear to disappoint her. That sounds like fun, sweetheart. As they drove home, Emily chatted excitedly about her day, about the math test she aced, the funny joke her friend told at lunch, and all her plans for the play. Jack focused on her voice, letting it wash away the day's fatigue and humiliation. Her happiness made everything worth it. Pulling into their apartment complex, Jack's muscles protested as he stepped out of the car. Emily noticed his stiff movements. "Are you okay, Daddy?" "Just a little tired from work," he said, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." "Did you have a good first day?" she asked, slipping her small hand into his as they walked to their apartment. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "You know what? I did. It was different, but good." And surprisingly, he realized he meant it. Despite everything, he had survived his first day. He had worked hard, helped people, and earned money to support his daughter. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, it could be enough for now. The evening crowd had thinned out at Riverside Mall, leaving behind scattered receipts and empty coffee cups. Jack pushed his cleaning cart past the shuttered storefronts, the wheels squeaking against the polished floor. After a week on the job, his hands no longer trembled when gripping the mop handle, and he'd memorized which stores needed extra attention at closing time. The food court was his least favorite spot. The smell of grease and forgotten fries reminded him of that desperate night at the dumpster. But tonight, he tackled it with determination, scrubbing each table until it gleamed under the dimmed lights. "You're getting pretty good at this." Evie's familiar voice came from behind him. She stood in her security uniform, a gentle smile on her face. Jack straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Thanks. Pete's been patient with my learning curve. I've noticed you staying late most nights," she said, leaning against one of the support columns. "Everything okay?" Jack's shoulders tensed. He glanced around the empty food court before speaking. "Just trying to earn a few extra hours. Emily needs new shoes for school, and the electric bill is due next week." Evie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Mind if I join you for a bit? My feet could use a break from patrolling." Jack gestured to one of the freshly cleaned tables, and they sat down. The mall's background music played softly overhead, a forgotten pop song from better days. "You know," Evie began, "when I first lost everything, I was too proud to accept help from anyone. Thought I could figure it all out on my own." She pulled out a small notebook from her pocket. "Then someone taught me about smart budgeting. Changed my whole perspective." Jack's eyes fixed on the notebook. "I used to be good with numbers. Had my own business and everything. Now it feels like I'm just throwing pennies at mountains of bills." "Let me show you something," Evie said, opening the notebook. She drew a simple chart. "This is how I started rebuilding. First column is absolute necessities: food, shelter, utilities. Second column is important but flexible, like clothes and school supplies. Third is everything else." Jack leaned forward, studying the neat rows of numbers. "Emily's birthday is coming up," he said quietly. "Used to be able to give her whatever she wanted. Now I can barely afford a cake." "There are ways," Evie said, writing down some local resources. "The community center has a program for birthday celebrations. They provide decorations, cake, even small gifts sometimes. No shame in using what's available to make your daughter happy." Jack's throat tightened. "She deserves better than charity." "It's not charity, Jack. It's community." Evie's voice was firm but kind. "When I was at my lowest, someone told me something I'll never forget. Pride can keep you warm, but it won't feed you." They spent the next hour going over Jack's expenses. Evie showed him how to track every dollar, where to find deals on groceries, and which bill companies might offer payment plans. She even knew about a local food bank that distributed fresh produce twice a week. "The hardest part," Jack admitted, rubbing his tired eyes, "is pretending everything's fine when Emily asks questions. She's smart, notices more than I think she does." "Kids are resilient," Evie said. "But they need honesty too. Maybe not every detail, but enough to understand why things are different." Jack thought about Emily's face when she'd seen him in his janitor's uniform for the first time. Instead of embarrassment, she'd hugged him and said, "You're keeping the whole mall clean, Daddy." Her pride in him had brought tears to his eyes. "I keep thinking about that night," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Digging through that dumpster. Never thought I'd sink that low." "But you're not there anymore," Evie reminded him. "You're working hard, providing for Emily. That takes courage." The mall's closing announcement echoed through the empty corridors. Jack stood up, reaching for his mop. "I should finish up here." "Here," Evie said, tearing out the pages with their budget planning. "Keep tracking everything." "And Jack?" She waited until he met her eyes. "If you need help, even just someone to talk to, I'm usually around. No shame in starting over. We've all been there. Jack carefully folded the papers and tucked them into his pocket. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to hope. Thanks, Evie, for everything. That's what friends are for, she replied with a warm smile, standing up to resume her rounds. As Jack watched her walk away, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The evening's work still waited, but somehow it seemed more manageable now. He pulled out the budget pages, studying them again. Maybe, just maybe, with Evie's help, he could find his way back to solid ground. The afternoon sun streamed through the mall's skylights, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Jack Matthews worked steadily, his mop moving in careful figure eights across the tile. Sweat dampened his collar, but he didn't mind. After 3 weeks of working as a janitor, he'd developed a rhythm to his tasks. Hey there, Jack. A warm voice caught his attention. Jack looked up to see Gerald Thompson, one of the mall's owners, walking toward him. The older man's salt and pepper hair and kind eyes reminded Jack of his own father. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson, Jack replied, straightening his posture. He'd seen the owner around but hadn't spoken to him directly before. Please, call me Gerald. The man smiled, gesturing to the gleaming floor. I've been noticing your work lately. The place has never looked better. Jack felt his cheeks warm at the praise. Thank you, sir. Just doing my job. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. Gerald motioned to a nearby bench. Do you have a minute? Jack's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at his cart, then back at Gerald. Of course. They sat down, and Jack tried to keep his hands from fidgeting in his lap. The mall owner seemed relaxed, but Jack couldn't help feeling nervous. I've been watching how you work, Gerald began. You're thorough, dedicated, and I've heard nothing but good things from other employees. Evie Sinclair, our night security guard, speaks very highly of you. Jack's chest tightened at the mention of Evie's name. She'd become such a source of support these past few weeks. That's kinda her, Jack managed. We're starting something new here at the mall, Gerald continued. A community outreach program. We want to help local families in need, provide job training, that sort of thing. He paused, studying Jack's face. We're looking for someone to help manage it, someone who understands what it means to struggle, but also knows the importance of dignity and hard work. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Was this really happening? Would you be interested in learning more about the position? Gerald asked. Jack's mind raced. Just weeks ago, he'd been digging through the mall's dumpster, desperate to feed his daughter. Now, here was an opportunity that could change everything. Yes, Jack said, his voice steadier than he felt. I would be very interested. Gerald smiled. Excellent. It would be a significant step up from your current position. More responsibility, better pay, regular hours. Regular hours. Jack thought of Emily, of being able to pick her up from school, of not having to scramble for late-night childcare. The position isn't guaranteed yet, Gerald cautioned. We'll need to conduct formal interviews, but I wanted to speak with you first. Your work ethic hasn't gone unnoticed. Thank you, sir. This means more than you know. Gerald stood, straightening his jacket. We'll set up an interview next week. In the meantime, keep up the good work. Jack watched Gerald walk away, his heart pounding. He looked down at his hands, calloused from weeks of manual labor, and felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. Jack cleaned with renewed energy, his mind racing with possibilities. A better job, better pay, a chance to help others who were struggling like he had been. When his shift ended, Jack changed out of his uniform with trembling fingers. He caught his reflection in the locker room mirror. The same tired eyes, the same worried lines around his mouth. But something was different. There was a light there that hadn't been present in months. The drive home was filled with nervous energy. Jack's fingers drummed against the steering wheel as he rehearsed how to tell Emily. He didn't want to get her hopes up too much. Nothing was certain yet, but he couldn't contain his excitement completely. Their small apartment felt warmer than usual when he walked in. Emily sat at their worn kitchen table, homework spread out before her, her dark hair falling in her face as she concentrated. Hi, Daddy, she called out, not looking up from her math problems. Jack hung his jacket by the door, watching his daughter. She was so much like her mother. The same determination, the same quiet strength. Hey, sweetie. He walked over and kissed the top of her head. How was school? Good. We learned about butterflies today. She finally looked up, her keen eyes studying his face. You look different. Jack sat down beside her, his heart full. Different how? Emily tilted her head, considering. Happy. Like when you used to tell me stories about your old store. Jack's throat tightened. Even at 9, she noticed everything. "Something good happened today," he said carefully. "The mall owners talked to me about a new job opportunity." Emily's eyes widened. "A new job?" "Maybe," Jack said quickly. "Nothing certain yet, but it would be a better position, helping people in the community." He paused, trying to keep his voice steady. "It would mean I could pick you up from school more often." Emily's face lit up. Before Jack could say another word, she launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Jack held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm so proud of you, Daddy," she whispered into his shoulder. Jack's eyes burned with tears. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear those words. "Thank you, sweetheart." Emily pulled back, her small face serious. "Does this mean we can get ice cream to celebrate?" Jack laughed, the sound surprising him with its authenticity. "Not tonight, honey, but maybe soon." He touched her nose gently. "We still need to be careful with money, okay?" She nodded, understanding in her young eyes. "That's okay. I'm just happy you're happy." Jack pulled her close again, marveling at his daughter's wisdom. For the first time in months, maybe even years, he felt like he could see a way forward. The path wasn't clear yet, but at least now there was a path. The morning crowd had thinned at the mall, leaving behind the usual mid-afternoon quiet. Jack pushed his cleaning cart past the food court, gathering discarded napkins and empty cups. He'd grown used to this routine over the past few weeks, finding an odd peace in the simplicity of his work. A sharp voice cut through the calm. "Evelyn!" Jack glanced up to see Evie frozen in place near the security desk. Her face had gone pale, her usual confident posture crumbling. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit stood before her, his presence seeming to fill the space. "Marcus." Evie's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Jack pretended to focus on his work, but he couldn't help watching from the corner of his eye. Something about this man made his skin crawl. The way he carried himself, like he owned the place, reminded Jack of those smooth-talking businessmen who'd convinced him to make bad investments after Sarah died. "Can't a man visit his ex-wife?" Marcus's voice dripped with false warmth. "Especially when she's fallen so far." His eyes swept over her security uniform with obvious disdain. Evie's hands trembled as she gripped her clipboard. "Please leave. Now." Marcus stepped closer. "Is that any way to treat the man who helped you manage your inheritance? $2 billion? Such a shame how it all turned out." Jack's mop clattered against his cart, drawing both their attention. He muttered a quick apology and moved away, but his mind was reeling. $2 billion? "Evie, you have no right to be here," Evie said, her voice stronger now but still shaking. "The restraining order expired last month." Marcus smiled, showing too many teeth. "We should catch up sometime. Discuss old times." Jack watched as Evie seemed to shrink into herself, something he'd never seen her do before. This strong woman who'd helped him through his darkest moment looked like she might shatter. Security to the main entrance. A voice crackled over Evie's radio, breaking the tension. She grabbed it like a lifeline. "I have to go," she said, turning away from Marcus. "We'll talk again soon, Evelyn." Marcus's words followed her as she hurried away, her usual steady stride now uneven and rushed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of worried glances and unspoken questions. Jack saw Evie only in passing, noticed how she kept to her security booth more than usual, her movements mechanical and distant. As his shift neared its end, Jack found himself walking toward the security desk. The evening crowd had dwindled, and the mall's lights had dimmed to their nighttime setting. Evie sat in her booth, staring at nothing. "Hey," Jack said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Rough day?" Evie looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You could say that." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Want to talk about it?" Jack pulled up a chair from nearby. "I'm pretty good at listening." For a long moment, Evie said nothing. The distant hum of the mall's heating system filled the silence. "I used to be wealthy," she finally said, her voice hollow. "Not just wealthy, rich beyond imagination. My father left me everything when he died. His company, his investments, his legacy. $2 billion worth of legacy." Jack waited, remembering how she'd listened to him when he needed it most. "I met Marcus at a charity gala." Evie's fingers traced invisible patterns on her desk. "He was charming, successful, everything I thought I wanted. We married 6 months later." She laughed bitterly. "I was such a fool." "You trusted someone you loved," Jack said quietly. "That doesn't make you a fool, doesn't it?" Evie's voice cracked. "He and my closest advisors, people I'd known my whole life, They orchestrated the whole thing, created fake investment opportunities, forged documents, emptied accounts. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. The company was in ruins, the money was gone, and Marcus. She swallowed hard. Marcus had disappeared with my best friend. Jack felt anger rise in his chest. Didn't the police? Oh, they investigated. Evie's smile was bitter. But Marcus was too smart, covered his tracks too well. They all did. In the end, I was left with nothing but shame and a stack of legal bills. She looked down at her uniform. This job, it was the first place that would hire me after the scandal. Everyone else thought I must have been involved, must have known. I'm so sorry, Jack said, meaning it. He understood now why she'd been so kind to him that night by the dumpster, why she seemed to know exactly what to say when he felt lost. You know what's funny? Evie wiped at her eyes. I don't miss the money, not really. I miss believing in people, trusting them. Marcus didn't just steal my wealth, he stole my faith in humanity. Jack reached across the desk and squeezed her hand. Not everyone's like him, I know that now. Evie squeezed back. Working here, watching people. I've seen more kindness in this mall than I ever did in those fancy galas. Single mothers counting pennies to buy their kids ice cream. Teenagers pooling money to help a friend buy new shoes. A father. She looked at Jack meaningfully, willing to swallow his pride to feed his daughter. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two broken people, understanding each other a little better. I don't know what Marcus wants, Evie admitted. But seeing him today, it brought everything back. All the shame, all the doubt. You're not that person anymore, Jack said firmly. Neither of us are who we used to be. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Evie nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you, Jack, for listening, for not judging. Hey, you did the same for me. Jack stood up, checking his watch. I should go pick up Emily from the after-school program. Will you be okay? I will be. Evie straightened in her chair, some of her usual strength returning. We both will be. Jack adjusted his borrowed tie for the 10th time, standing in front of the small mirror in the mall's employee bathroom. His reflection stared back at him. A man trying his best to look presentable in a second-hand suit that was slightly too big. He'd found it at the thrift store yesterday, and Evie had helped him iron out the worst of the wrinkles. You've got this, he whispered to himself, though his stomach churned with nerves. The community outreach position felt like a lifeline, a real chance to climb out of the hole he'd been in. But doubt crept in, as it always did. Would they see past the janitor's uniform he usually wore? Would they understand that he had more to offer? A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. 5 minutes until your interview, Jack, Evie called softly from outside. Thanks, he replied, taking one final look in the mirror. The dark circles under his eyes were still there, but determination shone in his gaze. In the hallway, Evie gave him an encouraging smile. She'd traded her usual security guard uniform for a simple blouse and slacks, having just finished her night shift. Remember what we practiced? She said, straightening his tie with motherly care. You know this mall better than anyone now. You see the people who need help every day? Jack nodded, grateful for her presence. I just hope they can see past. He gestured vaguely at himself. They will, Evie assured him, because you're exactly what they need. Someone who understands struggle firsthand. The walk to the management offices felt longer than usual. Each step on the polished floor echoed in Jack's ears. He'd mopped these same floors countless times, but today they led to something different, something better. The mall manager's secretary, Mrs. Chen, looked up as he entered. Mr. Matthews, they're ready for you. Inside the conference room, 3 people sat waiting. Mr. Richardson, the mall manager, Miss Torres from Human Resources, and Mr. Peterson, the regional director. Jack recognized them all from his daily rounds, though they'd never spoken more than a few words. Please, have a seat, Mr. Richardson said, gesturing to the chair across from them. Jack sat down, willing his hands not to shake as he placed his resume on the table. Through the glass walls, he caught a glimpse of Evie pretending to check her phone near the fountain, keeping watch from a distance. So, Mr. Matthews, Miss Torres began, we've noticed your dedication since you joined our maintenance team. But tell us why you're interested in this position specifically. Jack took a deep breath, remembering Evie's advice to speak from the heart. I know what it's like to need help and not know where to turn, he began. 3 months ago, I was digging through the dumpsters behind this mall, trying to find food for my daughter. The admission hung in the air. Jack saw Mr. Peterson shift uncomfortably, but he pressed on. I was ashamed, broken, and too proud to ask for help. But someone here showed me kindness when I needed it most. This mall became more than just a building to me. It became a sanctuary. I see others like me every day. The elderly couple who comes in just to stay warm. The teenage mom who needs a safe place to nurse her baby. The kids who hang around after school because home isn't safe. Jack leaned forward slightly, his voice growing stronger. I understand these people because I am these people, and I know that sometimes all it takes is one person reaching out, one moment of compassion to change everything. Mr. Richardson nodded slowly, making notes. And how would you handle the practical aspects? Budget management? Program coordination? Before. Jack paused, swallowing hard. Before my wife passed, I ran my own business for 8 years. I know how to manage budgets, coordinate with vendors, and build relationships. I've learned from my mistakes, and I understand the value of every dollar we'd be entrusted with. The questions continued for nearly an hour. Jack answered each one honestly, drawing on his experiences both as a business owner and as someone who had hit rock bottom. He spoke about his ideas for partnership programs with local food banks, about creating a resource center for job seekers, about turning the mall's unused spaces into community gathering spots. Through it all, he could feel Evie's presence outside, her quiet support giving him strength. She had shown him that second chances were possible, that past failures didn't define a person's worth. Finally, Mr. Peterson closed his notebook. Thank you, Mr. Matthews. This has been enlightening. We'll be in touch within the week. Jack stood, shaking each of their hands firmly. Thank you for the opportunity, he said, meaning every word. As he left the conference room, his steps felt lighter. Whether he got the position or not, he had spoken his truth. He had faced his shame and turned it into something meaningful. Evie was still by the fountain, pretending to read a magazine. As Jack approached, she looked up with questioning eyes. I did my best, he said simply, managing a small smile. That's all I could do. She nodded, understanding in her expression. Back to work then? Back to work, Jack agreed, heading to the maintenance closet to change back into his regular uniform. But this time, the janitor's vest didn't feel like a mark of shame. It felt like proof of how far he'd come, and maybe, just maybe, a stepping stone to where he was meant to be. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mall's empty corridors as Evie made her rounds. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floors, matching the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Everything seemed normal until she rounded the corner near the food court. Well, if it isn't Evelyn Sinclair, the voice made her freeze. She knew that voice, smooth as honey but hiding poison underneath. Standing by the closed coffee shop was Marcus Wheeler, her former business partner, looking as polished as ever in his expensive suit. Marcus! Evie's voice came out steadier than she felt. You're not supposed to be here. The mall isn't open yet. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come now, Evie. Is that any way to greet an old friend? We're not friends. She straightened her security guard uniform, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. What do you want? Marcus walked closer, his leather shoes clicking against the floor. You know, it's funny. I've been following your story, the great Evelyn Sinclair, working as a mall cop. He chuckled, the sound harsh and cold. How the mighty have fallen. Evie's hands clenched at her sides. If you're here just to mock me, oh no, I'm here for much more than that. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. Remember when you inherited that fortune? $2 billion. That's quite a sum to lose, isn't it? That was years ago, Evie said, her throat tightening. Ancient history, not to me. His voice hardened. Not to the man who came to you for help when his business was failing? Do you remember that day, Evie, when I practically begged you for a loan? She remembered. It had been right before everything fell apart, when she still had her wealth. Marcus had come to her, desperate for help with his failing tech startup. She'd turned him down, sensing something wasn't right about his proposal. Your business plan was full of holes, she said quietly. The numbers didn't add up. And look how well your judgment served you. Marcus's voice rose slightly. At least I lost my money, honestly. You? You trusted the wrong people, made horrible investments. The papers would love to hear the full story of how the great Evelyn Sinclair lost everything. Evie felt the blood drain from her face. You wouldn't. Oh, but I would. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Unless what? Unless you help me now. I'm starting a new venture, with your name attached. Even as a security guard, I could attract some investors. Your family name still carries weight." Evie shook her head, disgust rising in her throat. "You want me to help you scam people? I want what you owed me years ago." His pleasant mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "You had everything, Evie, everything, and you couldn't spare a dime for an old friend." "Get out," Evie said, her voice shaking. "Before I call the police." Marcus laughed, the sound echoing through the empty mall. "Go ahead, call them. And while you're at it, I'll call every newspaper in town. I'm sure they'd love to hear about the secret parties, the wasteful spending, the terrible investments. How you were so wrapped up in your own world that you couldn't see the vultures circling." Each word hit Evie like a physical blow. She'd worked so hard to put that past behind her, to rebuild her life from nothing. Now here was Marcus, threatening to drag it all into the light. "You have until the end of the week to decide," Marcus said, straightening his tie. "Help me, or everyone learns just how far you've fallen." He turned and walked away, leaving Evie standing alone in the empty mall. Her legs felt weak, and she leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. Later that day, she saw Jack approaching her security booth, his face bright with news about his interview. She couldn't bear to look at him, couldn't stand to see the hope in his eyes when her own world was crumbling. "Evie?" Jack's voice was concerned. "Are you okay?" "Fine," she said shortly, keeping her eyes on the security monitors. "Just busy." "The interview went really well," he continued. "I wanted to thank you for—" "I need to focus on work, Jack." Her voice came out harsher than intended. "I can't chat right now." She could feel his confusion, his hurt, but she couldn't bring herself to explain. How could she tell him about Marcus's threats, about the shame of her past mistakes? Jack had his own problems to deal with. He didn't need hers too. "If you need to talk," Jack started. "I don't." Evie kept her eyes fixed on the monitors, her posture rigid. "Please, just go." She heard him hesitate, then his footsteps slowly fading away. The distance felt necessary but wrong, like cutting off a lifeline. Yet, she couldn't burden him with her problems, couldn't risk dragging him into this mess. As she sat alone in her booth, Evie felt the walls she'd carefully built around her past beginning to crumble. Marcus's threats played on repeat in her mind, along with memories she'd tried so hard to forget. The betrayal, the shame, the headlines that had torn her life apart. The security monitors blurred as tears threatened to fall, but she blinked them back. She had worked too hard, come too far, to let Marcus destroy everything now. But as the day wore on, she found herself withdrawing more and more, avoiding Jack's concerned glances, keeping her responses to others short and professional. It was easier this way, she told herself. Easier to push people away than to risk them getting hurt when everything fell apart. Again, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket while he was mopping the mall's west corridor. His heart jumped. He'd been waiting for this call. Wiping his hands on his uniform, he answered with trembling fingers. "Hello, Mr. Matthews speaking." The voice on the other end was polite but brief. "Hello, Jack. This is Sandra from Mall Management." As the conversation continued, Jack's shoulders slumped lower and lower. His free hand gripped the mop handle until his knuckles turned white. When the call ended, he stood there, staring at nothing. They'd gone with someone else, someone with more recent management experience. The mop clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the empty corridor. Jack bent to pick it up, but his hands were shaking too much. He leaned against the wall instead, sliding down until he sat on the freshly cleaned floor. Everything he'd hoped for, everything he'd started to believe might be possible, it all felt like sand slipping through his fingers. "Jack?" Evie's voice came from down the hall. She must have seen him on her security rounds. He couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes. "I didn't get it," he managed to say. Evie's boots appeared in his line of sight. She crouched down beside him, her security uniform crinkling. "I'm so sorry. I really thought," his voice cracked. "I thought this was it. My chance to turn things around." "It's not the end," Evie said softly. "There will be other opportunities." Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Will there? Look at me, Evie. I'm a failed business owner mopping floors. Who am I kidding? This is probably all I'll ever be now." "That's not true." Evie's voice grew firm. "You're so much more than your job title. You're a dedicated father, a hard worker who can barely feed his daughter." The words burst out of him. "Do you know what Emily told me yesterday? She said she's not hungry at lunch anymore. But I know the truth. She's giving her lunch money to her friend because she knows we can't afford it." Tears stung his eyes. He wiped them away roughly with his sleeve. "She's 9 years old, Evie. She shouldn't have to worry about money. She shouldn't have to pretend she's not hungry." Evie was quiet for a moment. "You're right. She shouldn't have to worry about those things." But Jack, she has something many kids don't. A father who would do anything for her, who gets up every day and keeps trying, no matter how hard things get. Fat lot of good that's doing her, he muttered. It's doing more than you think. Evie shifted, sitting down beside him on the floor. You know what I see when I watch you with Emily? I see a girl who feels safe, loved. Who knows, her dad will always be there for her, no matter what. Jack closed his eyes, remembering Emily's face this morning as she headed off to school. How she'd hugged him extra tight, knowing today was the day he'd hear about the job. He swallowed hard. I just want to give her the life she deserves. And you will, Evie said. Maybe not today, maybe not through this particular job, but you will because you're not going to stop trying. Jack picked at a loose thread on his uniform. I don't know if I have any fight left in me. Yes, you do. Evie's voice was gentle but firm. You know how I know? Because every night you go home to that little girl of yours and somehow find the strength to smile, to make her feel like everything's okay. She was right about that much. No matter how defeated he felt, he always managed to put on a brave face for Emily. The afternoon sun slanted through the skylight above them, creating patterns on the floor. Jack watched them shift and change, thinking about Emily, about the job, about all the dreams he'd started to build. I have to pick her up from school soon, he said finally, his voice rough. Evie stood up, offering him her hand. Then you better get off this floor and finish your shift. Can't have my favorite janitor slacking off. Despite everything, Jack felt the ghost of a smile touch his lips. He took her hand and let her pull him up. An hour later, Jack waited outside Emily's school, trying to compose himself. When she came bounding down the steps, her backpack bouncing, he forced a smile onto his face. Daddy! She threw herself into his arms. Did you hear about the job? Did you get it? Jack's heart clenched. He hugged her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Not this time, sweetheart. Emily pulled back, her small face serious. That's okay. They just don't know how awesome you are yet. Maybe not, Jack agreed, his throat tight. He ruffled her hair, trying to keep his voice light. Things will get better, Em. I promise. But as they walked home hand in hand, Jack felt the weight of that promise pressing down on him. He had no idea how he was going to keep it, but for Emily's sake, he had to try. He had to find a way to keep believing, even when it felt impossible, even when every step forward seemed to push him 2 steps back, even when his own doubts threatened to drown him, because Emily believed in him. And right now, that had to be enough. The morning after the disappointing phone call, Jack arrived early for his shift, his shoulders heavy but his jaw set with determination. The mall was quiet, only a few early workers setting up their stores. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as he made his way to the maintenance room. Well, look who's here bright and early, a cheerful voice called out. It was Bernie, one of the senior custodians, a man in his 60s with silver hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He was already in his uniform, organizing cleaning supplies on the metal shelves. Morning, Bernie. Jack managed a small smile, reaching for his own uniform. Bernie studied him for a moment, his experienced eyes catching the shadows under Jack's eyes. Rough day yesterday? He asked, keeping his tone casual as he continued sorting through bottles of cleaning solution. Jack paused, his hands on his locker door. Got turned down for that community outreach position, he admitted, the words still tasting bitter in his mouth. Bernie nodded slowly, putting down the bottle he was holding. You know, Jack, I've been working here for 15 years. Started right after my hardware store went under. He leaned against the shelf, crossing his arms. Thought it was the end of the world back then. Jack turned to face him, surprised by this revelation. You owned a hardware store? Sure did. Had it for 20 years before the big box stores moved in. Bernie's eyes crinkled with a gentle smile. But you know what? This job taught me something important. There's dignity in any work that's done well. Jack felt something loosen in his chest as he buttoned up his uniform shirt. Sometimes it's hard to see it that way, he admitted. Come on. Bernie gestured for Jack to follow him. Let me show you a few tricks I've learned over the years. Might make your day a little easier. Throughout the morning, Bernie showed Jack efficient ways to tackle his cleaning duties. He demonstrated how to angle the mop just right to clean under display cases, shared his schedule for handling different areas of the mall, and even introduced him to several store owners who always kept coffee brewing for the maintenance staff. See that bench over there? Bernie pointed during their break. I sand and revarnish it every spring. Nobody asked me to. It's just something I do. Makes the place a little nicer for folks who need a rest. Jack looked at the bench with new eyes, noticing its warm, well-maintained finish. You take pride in this work, he observed. Every job has value, Jack. It's not about what you do, it's about how you do it. Bernie pulled out his lunch bag. Join me? The food court doesn't open for another hour, but I always pack extra. As they sat sharing Bernie's homemade sandwiches, other maintenance workers began gathering around. There was Maria, who worked the afternoon shift and always had funny stories about her grandkids. Tom, a college student working part-time who was studying engineering, and Sarah, who'd been at the mall almost as long as Bernie. Hey Jack, Sarah called out, unpacking her own lunch. Bernie showing you the ropes? More like showing me how much I still have to learn, Jack replied, earning chuckles from the group. Oh, you should have seen me when I started, Maria laughed. I used to mix up the cleaning solutions until Bernie saved me from creating a toxic cloud in the bathrooms. The conversation flowed easily, filled with workplace stories and gentle teasing. Jack found himself relaxing, even laughing at Tom's terrible puns. It was strange how comfortable it felt, sitting here with these people who took such pride in their work. From her security booth, Evie watched the scene unfold. She'd been worried about Jack since yesterday, but seeing him surrounded by his coworkers, sharing lunch and stories, brought a smile to her face. He looked different somehow, less isolated, more at ease. Later that afternoon, as Jack was finishing up his shift, Bernie appeared again. Hey, Jack, we've got a tradition here. Every Friday, we all chip in for pizza and eat together before the evening shift starts. Nothing fancy, just good company. You should join us. Jack hesitated for just a moment before nodding. I'd like that, Bernie. Thanks. And bring that daughter of yours, Bernie added with a warm smile. Maria's granddaughter is about her age. They might hit it off. As Jack gathered his things to leave, he caught sight of Evie making her rounds. She gave him a small wave, and he waved back, noticing the relief in her eyes. Maybe this wasn't where he'd planned to be, but as he thought about Bernie's words and the warmth of his new coworkers, he realized it wasn't such a bad place to start rebuilding. Walking through the mall's main corridor, Jack paused to look at Bernie's bench. He ran his hand along the smooth surface, feeling the care that had gone into maintaining it. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd ask Bernie to teach him how to sand and varnish wood. It might come in handy someday. From her position near the entrance, Evie watched Jack leave, noting the straighter set of his shoulders and the easier rhythm of his walk. She'd seen the way the maintenance team had welcomed him, especially Bernie taking him under his wing. Despite everything happening in her own life, she felt a spark of hope for Jack. Sometimes the best healing came from the most unexpected places. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Evie sat in her security booth, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. The confrontation with her former business partner just minutes ago had left her shaken to her core. Tears streamed down her face, leaving dark spots on her navy blue uniform. You're nothing now, his words echoed in her mind. Just a pathetic mall cop who used to have it all. Her chest felt tight, each breath coming in short, painful gasps. The security monitors in front of her blurred as more tears welled up. The usually composed security guard was falling apart, years of buried pain finally breaking through her carefully constructed walls. The sound of footsteps approaching made her quickly wipe her eyes, but it was too late to hide the evidence of her breakdown. Jack appeared in the doorway, his cleaning cart parked outside. His expression shifted from casual greeting to concern when he saw her face. Evie? His voice was soft, filled with worry. What's wrong? She tried to wave him away, forcing a weak smile. It's nothing, Jack. Just having a moment. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her attempt at composure. Jack stepped into the small booth, his presence filling the tiny space. He'd never seen Evie like this before. She'd always been the strong one, the one helping him through his struggles. Seeing her so vulnerable made his heart ache. I saw him, Jack said quietly. That man who was talking to you earlier, he seemed aggressive. Evie's shoulders slumped, and a fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. He's from my past, she managed to say between shaky breaths. When I had everything. When I was somebody. Jack pulled up the spare chair and sat beside her, close enough to offer support but giving her enough space to breathe. The security monitors cast a pale blue glow across their faces as they sat in the quiet booth. Evie's voice trembled. He knows exactly where to hit. Keeps reminding me of everything I lost, how far I've fallen. She gestured around the small security booth. From penthouses to this little box, from designer clothes to this uniform. Jack watched as she struggled to maintain her composure, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The strong, confident woman who had helped him through his darkest moments was crumbling before his eyes. Sometimes, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I wonder if he's right. Look at me now, watching other people's property, living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe I am pathetic. Stop, Jack said firmly, surprising both of them with the authority in his voice. You're not pathetic, Evie. You're one of the strongest people I know. She looked at him, her eyes red and puffy. You don't know everything about my past, Jack. The mistakes I made, the people I trusted. I know enough, he replied. I know you didn't let losing everything destroy you. You rebuilt your life. That takes courage. A sob escaped her throat, and she covered her face with her hands. Jack reached out hesitantly, then placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. This simple gesture of comfort seemed to break something inside her, and she began crying in earnest. The security monitors continued their silent vigil as Jack sat with her, his hand steady on her shoulder. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty words or false promises. He just stayed, offering the same kind of quiet support she had given him when he was at his lowest. Minutes passed, marked only by the soft hum of the electronics and Evie's gradually steadying breaths. When she finally lowered her hands, her face was tear-stained but calmer. I'm sorry, she whispered, straightening her uniform. You shouldn't have to see me like this. Don't apologize, Jack said softly. You've seen me at my worst, remember? Digging through dumpsters isn't exactly a high point. A ghost of a smile crossed her face, but her eyes remained distant. This is different, Jack. My past. It's complicated. Messy. I can't. She shook her head. I can't talk about it. Not now. Jack nodded, understanding the weight of unspoken pain. You don't have to explain anything. Just know you're not alone, okay? Evie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to regain her professional demeanor. The vulnerability that had broken through was already being locked away again, but Jack could still see the hurt lingering in her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly, smoothing her uniform again. For staying. For not asking questions. Jack stood up slowly, recognizing her need to rebuild her walls. That's what friends are for, right? He said simply. You've been there for me and Emily. Let me be here for you. Evie nodded, but didn't meet his eyes. Her hands were steady now as she turned back to the security monitors, but her posture remained tense. The moment of raw emotion was passing, and she was retreating back into herself. I should get back to work, Jack said, understanding her silent request for space. But Evie, whatever that man said, whatever happened in your past, it doesn't define who you are now. She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the monitors, but he saw her shoulders tremble slightly. As he stepped out of the booth, he heard her take a deep, shaky breath, trying to compose herself fully. Jack returned to his cleaning cart, his mind heavy with concern for his friend. He wanted to help her, to do more than just offer silent support, but he recognized the walls she was putting up. Sometimes, he knew from experience, you needed time to process your pain before you could share it with others. As he pushed his cart down the quiet mall corridor, he glanced back at the security booth. Through the window, he could see Evie sitting straight-backed in her chair, her professional mask back in place. But now he knew what pain lay beneath that careful facade, and his heart ached for her. The security booth felt smaller than usual as Jack watched Evie wipe away her tears. Her usual confident posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and trembling hands. The harsh fluorescent lights cast unflattering shadows across her face, making her look older and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Evie, Jack said softly, pulling up the spare chair. You can't keep bottling this up. She turned away, focusing on the bank of security monitors. I'm fine, Jack. You should get back to work. No, you're not fine. Jack's voice was firm but gentle. I know what fine looks like, and this isn't it. I've been there, pretending everything's okay when your world is falling apart. Evie's hands clenched into fists on the desk. This is different, is it? Jack leaned forward. Because from where I'm sitting, I see someone who's carrying way too much on their shoulders. Just like I was when you found me by that dumpster. His words hit home. Evie's shoulders began to shake as she fought back fresh tears. I can't talk about this. Why not? Jack asked. Because you're ashamed? Because you think you should be stronger? He paused, letting his words sink in. I thought the same thing, but you taught me different, remember? The security monitors cast a blue glow across Evie's face as she finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup smeared. I trusted him, Jack. I trusted him with everything. Your business partner? She nodded, taking a shaky breath. We grew up together. When I inherited the money, he was the first person I called, I thought. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought he'd help me manage it responsibly. Jack stayed quiet, giving her space to continue. He convinced me to invest in his ventures, said we'd do great things together. A bitter laugh escaped her. I was so naive. He had shell companies set up, fake investments. By the time I figured it out, most of the money was gone. That's not being naive, Jack said firmly. That's being human. Trusting someone you've known your whole life isn't stupid. Isn't it? Evie's voice cracked. $2 billion, Jack. Gone. And now he's back, threatening to tell everyone how stupid I was, how easily I fell for it all. Jack straightened in his chair. Is that what he's holding over you? The truth about what happened? Evie nodded miserably. He says, if I don't give him what's left of my savings, he'll make sure everyone knows what a fool I was. The media would love it. Another rich heir who couldn't handle the responsibility. Look at me, Jack said, waiting until she met his eyes. You're not that person anymore. The woman I know is strong, compassionate, and wise. The woman I know helped a desperate father when no one else would. That's who you are now. Tears spilled down Evie's cheeks. I'm scared, Jack. I've worked so hard to build something new here. If people find out, then let them find out, Jack said firmly. You taught me there's no shame in starting over. Remember? The same goes for you. It's different when— It's not different, Jack interrupted. You think I wasn't ashamed when you found me digging through garbage? You think I wanted anyone to know how far I'd fallen? He softened his voice. But you showed me that rock bottom can be a foundation to build on. Evie's hands trembled as she reached for a tissue. The mall owners, if they find out, they should know, Jack said. Not because your ex-partner is threatening you, but because you're ready to own your story. You've earned their trust through hard work, just like I have. That matters more than any mistakes in your past. I don't know if I can, she whispered. You can, Jack assured her. And you won't do it alone. I'll be right there with you. For the first time that evening, a ghost of a smile crossed Evie's face. Why would you do that? Because that's what friends do, Jack said simply, and because you did the same for me when I needed it most. Evie took a deep, shuddering breath. What if they fire me? Then we'll face that together too. Jack reached out and squeezed her hand. But I don't think they will. You're good at your job, Evie. You care about this place and the people in it. That's what matters now. She wiped her eyes again, sitting up straighter. You really think I should tell them everything? I think you should tell them your story. Not the version your ex-partner is threatening to spread, but the real story, about how you lost everything but found the strength to start over. Jack smiled gently. Sound familiar? Evie managed a weak laugh. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best, Jack said, standing up. Look, the owners are still in their office. I can go with you right now if you want. Evie glanced at the security monitors, then back at Jack. Fear still lingered in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Determination. You'll stay with me? Every step of the way, Jack promised. The early morning sun hadn't yet reached the mall's high windows when Jack arrived for his shift. His cleaning cart squeaked along the empty corridors as he made his rounds, the sound echoing off the marble floors. Even after weeks of doing this job, his hands still felt strange gripping the mop handle instead of signing business documents like he used to. Morning, Jack, called out Tom from the coffee shop, already preparing for the day. Want your usual? Jack smiled and shook his head. Saving every penny these days, Tom, but thanks. He'd learned to take pride in the small things now, how the floors gleamed after he mopped them, the way the chrome railings sparkled when he finished polishing. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but he refused to let his disappointment show. Emily deserved better than a father who gave up. As he worked his way through the food court, Jack noticed a woman in a crisp business suit watching him. She stood near the management office, a tablet in hand, occasionally glancing in his direction. Jack kept his head down, focusing on his work. He'd learned that the best way to handle scrutiny was to prove himself through actions, not words. The morning wore on, and Jack had just finished cleaning up a particularly stubborn coffee stain when the woman approached him. Mr. Matthews? Her voice was friendly but professional. I'm Sarah Chen, the new operations manager. Do you have a moment? Jack straightened up, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. Of course, Miss Chen. I've been reviewing the staff files, she said, gesturing to her tablet. And I've noticed something interesting about your background. You used to own your own business? Jack's throat tightened. Yes, ma'am. A small marketing firm. And before that, you worked in retail management for 5 years? He nodded, wondering where this was going. The last time he'd gotten his hopes up about a promotion, it hadn't ended well. Walk with me, Mr. Matthews. Sarah started moving toward the management office, and Jack followed, leaving his cleaning cart against the wall. I've been watching you these past few days. You're always early, your work is thorough, and I've seen how you interact with the other staff and customers. They entered her office, and she motioned for him to sit down. The chair felt uncomfortably familiar. It wasn't so long ago that he'd sat in a similar one, hoping for the community outreach position. "I'll be direct," Sarah said, settling behind her desk. "We're restructuring our operations team, and I need someone who understands both the practical and management sides of running a mall. Someone who knows what it's like to work at different levels." Jack's heart began to race, but he kept his expression neutral. He learned not to count on anything until it was certain. "The position is Assistant Operations Supervisor," she continued. "You'd be overseeing the maintenance and cleaning crews, managing schedules, and helping coordinate with vendors. It's not glamorous, but it's a step up from your current position, with better pay and benefits." Jack's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I appreciate you considering me, Miss Chen, but—" He hesitated, thinking of his previous disappointment. "Why me?" Sarah smiled. "Because you've shown something valuable, humility and determination. You went from owning a business to taking an entry-level position, and instead of treating it as beneath you, you've excelled at it. That's the kind of perspective we need." She slid a folder across the desk. "The details are all in here. Take it home, look it over. We can discuss your decision tomorrow." Jack left the office in a daze, the folder tucked under his arm. He returned to his cleaning cart, going through the motions of his work while his mind raced with possibilities. The extra money would mean no more scraping by, no more counting every penny. Maybe they could even move to a better apartment. When his shift ended, Jack rushed home to their small apartment. Emily was already there, working on her homework at their worn kitchen table. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening at his obvious excitement. "Dad, did something good happen?" Jack pulled out a chair and sat down beside her, placing the folder on the table. "Remember how I told you that sometimes life gives you second chances?" Emily nodded, pushing aside her math worksheet. "Like when Mrs. Peterson let me retake my spelling test?" "Exactly like that." Jack opened the folder, showing her the job offer. "The new manager offered me a better job today. If I take it, things might get a little easier for us." Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? Does this mean we can get ice cream sometimes?" Jack laughed, pulling her into a hug. "It might mean exactly that, sweetheart." They spent the evening celebrating in their own small way, sharing a package of cookies Emily had saved from her lunch and making plans for the future. Jack watched his daughter's excited face as she talked about all the possibilities, and he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: pride without shame, hope without fear. For the first time since losing his business, Jack felt like he was truly moving forward, not just surviving. He thought about all the times he'd wanted to give up, how close he'd come to letting despair win, but here he was, being offered another chance, all because he'd kept going, kept trying, kept working. Emily gathered up the cookie crumbs with her finger, grinning at him. "I knew you could do it, Dad. You always say that hard work pays off." Jack reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're right, kiddo. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than we expect." Evie's footsteps echoed through the quiet corridor as she made her way to the mall management office. Her heart pounded against her chest, and her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her security guard uniform. The familiar weight of her badge felt heavier today. The mall was just beginning to stir, with early morning cleaning crews going about their duties. She spotted Jack pushing his cleaning cart in the distance, and he gave her an encouraging nod. His simple gesture of support helped steady her nerves. Outside the frosted glass door that read Management Office, Evie took a deep breath. She'd rehearsed this conversation countless times in her head, but nothing could truly prepare her for the reality of laying bare her past. She knocked on the door. "Come in," called Mrs. Chen, the head mall manager. Evie stepped into the warmth of the office. Mrs. Chen sat behind her desk, while Mr. Peterson, the assistant manager, stood near the window with a cup of coffee in hand. They both looked up with mild curiosity. "Evelyn," Mrs. Chen said with a gentle smile, "what brings you here so early?" "I need to tell you something," Evie began, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Something about my past that you should know." Mrs. Chen gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down." Evie lowered herself into the chair, her uniform suddenly feeling too tight around her neck. "I haven't been completely honest about who I am," she started, "or rather who I used to be." Mr. Peterson moved closer, leaning against the desk with interest. 10 years ago, I inherited $2 billion from my father's technology company," Evie said. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth after so many years of keeping them locked away. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows shot up, but she remained silent. I was unprepared for that kind of wealth, Evie continued, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I trusted the wrong people. My business partner, her voice caught for a moment. He convinced me to invest in what turned out to be fraudulent companies. When everything fell apart, I lost everything. The office fell silent, except for the distant hum of the mall's heating system. Mr. Peterson set his coffee cup down with a soft clink. I've been running from that past ever since, Evie admitted. Working here as a security guard, trying to rebuild my life from scratch. But recently, my former business partner has resurfaced, threatening to expose my story to the media. She took another deep breath. I wanted you to hear it from me first. I know this might affect my position here, but I've learned that hiding from the truth only makes things worse. Mrs. Chen leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Why are you telling us this now? Because, Evie paused, gathering her thoughts. Because I've watched someone else rebuild their life here. Jack Matthews, our janitor. He showed me that starting over isn't shameful, it's brave. And I want to be brave too. The loss wasn't just about the money, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I lost my confidence, my trust in people, my sense of purpose. But working here, watching people like Jack fight to make better lives for themselves, it's taught me that wealth isn't what defines us. It's how we handle our struggles that matters. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. I know my past might seem shocking, but I'm still the same person who's guarded this mall for the past 3 years. The same person who's tried to help others when I could, even though I couldn't help myself. Mr. Peterson straightened up, exchanging a look with Mrs. Chen. Actually, Evelyn, your timing is interesting. We've been discussing expanding our community outreach program. Mrs. Chen nodded, a warm smile spreading across her face. Someone with your experience, both the success and the failure, could offer valuable insight to people trying to rebuild their lives. Evie's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? We've been looking for someone to mentor people in our financial literacy program. Mrs. Chen explained. Someone who understands both success and hardship. Someone who can teach others about resilience. Your honesty today, Mr. Peterson added, shows exactly the kind of character we want in that position. Evie sat stunned, her hands unclenching for the first time since she'd entered the office. You're not firing me? Mrs. Chen chuckled softly. No, Evelyn. We're offering you a chance to use your experience to help others. Would you be interested in taking on a mentorship role in our community outreach program? Tears spilled down Evie's cheeks, but this time she didn't try to hide them. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would. Your past doesn't define you, Mrs. Chen said gently, but it can help define your future and maybe help others find their way too. Evie nodded, overcome with emotion. After years of running from her past, she had finally faced it head on. And instead of the judgment she'd feared, she found understanding and opportunity. The weight that had been crushing her chest for so long began to lift, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The early morning sunlight streamed through the mall's glass ceiling, casting warm patterns across the polished floor. Jack Matthews stood in front of the newly renovated community center, his fingers tracing the fresh lettering on the door that read Community Support Office. The space, once an empty storefront, had been transformed into a welcoming haven for those in need. His new button-down shirt and khakis felt strange after months in a janitor's uniform, but they represented something more than just a change in clothes. They represented hope. First day jitters? Evie's familiar voice came from behind him. She walked up beside him, no longer in her security guard uniform, but wearing professional attire that suited her new role as a mentor. A little, Jack admitted, running his hand through his neatly combed hair. Never thought I'd be on this side of things. That's exactly why you're perfect for this job, Evie said, pulling out a set of keys. You know what it's like to need help, to feel lost. The door clicked open, and they stepped into the bright office space. The walls were painted in warm colors, with comfortable chairs arranged in small groupings. Resource pamphlets lined the walls, and a coffee station sat in the corner. It wasn't fancy, but it felt welcoming. Emily was so excited this morning, Jack said, setting his briefcase on his new desk. She made me take 3 different pictures before I left for work. Said she wanted to remember this day. Evie smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She's proud of you, Jack. We all are. Their first appointment wasn't for another hour, giving them time to prepare. Jack pulled out several folders, organizing them carefully. Each one represented someone like him, someone who needed a helping hand, someone who might be too proud to ask for it. "Remember when I found you that night?" Evie asked softly, arranging some pamphlets on a nearby table. "By the dumpster?" Jack's hand stilled. The memory still stung, but not as sharply as before. "Never thought I'd end up there. Never thought I'd end up here either." "Life has a funny way of working out sometimes," Evie said. She paused, looking around the room. "When I lost everything, I thought that was the end. My whole identity was wrapped up in that money, in that lifestyle. But now," she gestured to the space around them, "now I know it was just the beginning." The phone rang, and Jack answered it with a newfound confidence. "Community Support Office. This is Jack speaking." He listened for a moment, jotting down notes. "Yes, we can definitely help with that. Can you come in this afternoon?" After he hung up, he looked at Evie. "Single mother of 3, lost her job last week, sounds scared." "Just like you were," Evie noted, pulling up a chair to his desk. "What's the plan?" "First, we'll help her apply for emergency assistance," Jack said, his voice steady and sure. "Then we'll look at job opportunities right here in the mall. Several stores are hiring, and I've already talked to the managers about our program." Their first visitor arrived early, a young man in a worn jacket, clutching a crumpled eviction notice. Jack recognized the look in his eyes, that mixture of desperation and shame he'd once seen in his own reflection. "Hi, I'm Jack," he said, extending his hand, "and this is Evie. We're here to help." Over the next few hours, they worked together seamlessly. Jack shared his own story openly, watching as the tension in their visitors' shoulders eased when they realized he understood their struggles firsthand. Evie's wisdom about rebuilding after loss resonated deeply with those who felt they'd hit rock bottom. During their lunch break, they sat in the food court, watching the bustling mall life around them. "You're a natural at this," Evie said, taking a bite of her sandwich, the same kind she'd once shared with Jack on that fateful night. "It helps that I'm not doing it alone," Jack replied. He watched a young family walk by, remembering how it felt to worry about every meal, every bill. "You know, when Emily said thank you, Mommy, to you that night, I felt so ashamed. But now I understand. She saw something in you that I wasn't ready to see yet. Someone who cared enough to help." Evie's eyes softened. "And now we get to be that someone for others." Back in the office, they tackled the afternoon appointments together. Jack helped a former business owner navigate bankruptcy procedures, drawing from his own experience to offer practical advice. Evie worked with a woman who'd lost her savings to a scam, sharing techniques for rebuilding financial stability. As the day drew to a close, they stood together by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, the same view they'd both seen countless times. Evie from her security booth, Jack from his janitorial duties, now held new meaning. "Did you ever think, when you were watching me that night," Jack asked, "that we'd end up here?" "No," Evie admitted, her voice soft. "I just knew I couldn't watch someone else suffer alone, not when I understood that pain so well." Jack nodded, understanding perfectly. "We've come a long way from dumpster diving and security patrols. But we needed that journey to get here," Evie said, gathering her things. "Every step of it." They looked around their new office, at the thank you note already pinned to their bulletin board from their first success story that morning, at the coffee cups still sitting on their desks, at the hope they'd managed to create in this space. "Ready for another day tomorrow?" Evie asked, reaching for the light switch. Jack smiled, thinking of Emily's proud face that morning, of the people they'd helped today, of how far they'd both come. More than ready. The early morning light filtered through the mall's glass ceiling, casting a warm glow over Jack as he organized pamphlets on his new desk. The small office space, though modest, felt like a palace compared to where he'd been just months ago. A gentle knock on the doorframe made him look up. Evie stood there, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, walking in and placing 1 cup on his desk. "First day jitters?" Jack accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "A little. Still feels surreal, you know, being on this side of things now." "I know exactly what you mean." Evie settled into the chair across from him, her security uniform replaced by business casual attire that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. "But that's exactly why we're the right people for this job. We've been there." They spent the morning reviewing applications for the mall's new emergency assistance program. Each story they read hit close to home. Single parents struggling to make ends meet, elderly folks choosing between medication and food, young people trying to rebuild after setbacks. "Look at this one," Jack said, sliding a form across the desk. Single mom, 3 kids, lost her job last month. She's been trying to find work while keeping her family fed. He paused, his throat tight. That could have been me, if things had gone differently. Evie nodded, studying the application. Let's make her a priority. I'm thinking we could connect her with the job training program at the department store, and maybe emergency food assistance in the meantime? Already thinking like a pro, Jack smiled, making notes on the form. Emily asked me this morning if we were going to be helping other kids like her, kids whose parents are having a tough time. Smart girl, Evie said softly. She gets that from her dad. The morning flew by as they developed action plans and reached out to local resources. Jack marveled at how naturally they worked together. Evie's business experience complementing his practical knowledge of surviving hard times. Around noon, an elderly woman timidly knocked on their door. Her clothes were clean but worn, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. "Come in, please," Evie said warmly, standing to greet her. "I'm Evie, and this is Jack. How can we help you today?" The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Chen, sank into the offered chair. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never had to ask for help before." Jack recognized the shame in her eyes. He'd seen it in his own mirror not so long ago. "Mrs. Chen, asking for help isn't a weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing we can do." Gradually, her story emerged. A retired teacher, Mrs. Chen, had been managing on her pension until her husband's recent health crisis drained their savings. Now she was facing eviction from her apartment of 20 years. As she spoke, Evie pulled out a notepad, jotting down details. Jack noticed how she kept her body language open and gentle, helping Mrs. Chen feel safe enough to share her story. "First things first," Evie said when Mrs. Chen finished speaking. "Let's look at some immediate solutions to prevent the eviction." She pulled out a folder of resources they'd compiled. "There's an emergency rental assistance program we can connect you with today," Jack added. "And while we work on that, we can help you apply for some longer-term support programs. There are benefits you might qualify for that could help with your husband's medical expenses." Mrs. Chen's eyes welled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Jack said firmly. "We're here because someone helped us when we needed it. Now it's our turn to pass that forward." For the next hour, Jack and Evie worked together seamlessly, Jack helping Mrs. Chen fill out applications, while Evie made calls to expedite the emergency assistance. By the time Mrs. Chen left, clutching a folder of resources and wiping away grateful tears, they had a solid plan in place to help her stay in her home. After she left, Jack and Evie sat in contemplative silence for a moment. "That felt good," Jack finally said. "Really good," Evie nodded, her eyes bright. "Remember when you were going through the dumpster that night? If someone had told you then that you'd be here now, helping others, I wouldn't have believed it," Jack finished. "Just like I wouldn't have believed I'd find such a good friend in a security guard who caught me dumpster diving." "Former security guard," Evie corrected with a grin. "Now I'm a respected community outreach coordinator, thank you very much." They shared a laugh, but there was deep understanding beneath the humor. They'd both hit rock bottom and found their way back up. And now they were using their experiences to light the way for others. "We should set up a regular coffee hour," Jack suggested, gathering the papers from Mrs. Chen's visit. "Make it easier for people to come in and ask for help without feeling like they're being judged." "Great idea," Evie agreed. "We could have it in the food court. Make it casual. Sometimes the hardest part is walking through that first door and admitting you need help." They spent the rest of the afternoon developing the idea, drawing from their own experiences to create a program that would feel welcoming and safe. Jack found himself getting excited about the possibilities, his mind racing with ways they could reach more people. "You know what's funny?" he said as they finished up for the day. "When I was at my lowest point, I thought I had nothing left to give. Now I realize that going through all that gave me exactly what I needed to help others." Evie stopped gathering her things and looked at him thoughtfully. "That's exactly it. Our struggles didn't break us. They gave us the tools to understand what others are going through. Every person we help is a reminder that rock bottom doesn't have to be the end of the story." Looking around their small office, with its resource folders and carefully organized pamphlets, Jack felt a deep sense of purpose. They weren't just offering handouts, they were offering hope, understanding, and a path forward, just like they'd found for themselves. The morning sunlight streamed through the mall's glass ceiling, casting long shadows across the community center's newly renovated space. Evie stood at the front desk, arranging a display of resources for families in need. Her hands moved with purpose, no longer trembling when she thought about her past. "These should go here," she murmured to herself, organizing pamphlets about financial assistance programs. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once worth billions, now helping others navigate poverty. But for the first time in years, the thought didn't sting. Jack appeared from his office, his tie slightly crooked but his eyes bright. "Morning, Evie," he called out, carrying a stack of folders. "Ready for the community meeting later?" "More than ready," she replied, smoothing down her blazer. The security guard uniform was now reserved for occasional night shifts. During the day, she dressed like the professional she'd become again, though this time, her success felt earned rather than inherited. A young mother pushed through the glass doors, holding a toddler's hand. Evie recognized the look of desperation in her eyes. She'd seen it in Jack's face months ago, and in her own mirror years before. "Welcome," Evie said warmly, moving around the desk. "I'm Evie, and this is Jack. We're here to help." The woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. I saw the flyer about assistance with childcare." Jack stepped forward, his voice gentle. "You're in the right place. Why don't we sit down and talk about it?" As Jack led the woman to a comfortable seating area, Evie watched him with pride. Gone was the man who'd been too ashamed to accept help. In his place stood someone who understood that everyone needed support sometimes. The morning passed quickly with a steady stream of visitors. During a quiet moment, Evie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, seeing her former business partner's name. Without hesitation, she declined the call and blocked the number. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, noticing her expression. "Actually, yes," Evie said, surprised to find she meant it. "I'm done letting the past control me. Those people, they can't hurt me anymore." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It feels good, doesn't it? Moving forward?" "It really does." Evie smiled, remembering how she'd once thought she'd never recover from her losses. "Emily's school play is next week, right?" "Thursday night," Jack confirmed, his face lighting up at the mention of his daughter. "She's got a speaking part this time. Can't stop practicing her lines at home." "Save me a seat?" Evie asked, straightening a pile of forms on her desk. "Already did." Jack grinned. She insisted, said her Aunt Evie had to be there. The afternoon brought the community meeting, a gathering of local business owners and residents discussing ways to help struggling families. Evie stood at the podium, her voice clear and confident as she shared her vision for expanding their outreach programs. "We're not just offering handouts," she explained to the attentive crowd. "We're creating opportunities for people to rebuild their lives with dignity." From his seat in the front row, Jack watched her with admiration. This was the real Evie, not the wealthy heiress she'd once been, not the broken security guard she'd become, but a woman who'd found her true purpose. After the meeting, as they cleaned up the conference room together, Evie paused. "You know, I used to think losing everything was the worst thing that could happen to me. And now?" Jack asked, stacking chairs against the wall. "Now I know it was just the beginning of something better." She smiled, helping him with the last chair. "I needed to lose it all to find out who I really am." Jack nodded, understanding perfectly. Sometimes, rock bottom is just a foundation. "Speaking of foundations," Evie said, "how about dinner? I'm starving, and we should celebrate today's success." They chose a quiet diner near the mall, nothing fancy, but comfortable and welcoming. The waitress knew them both by name now, bringing their usual orders without asking. "Remember when we first met?" Jack asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Me digging through that dumpster, and me trying to figure out how to help without making you feel worse?" Evie finished. "We've come a long way." Their food arrived, simple hamburgers and fries. Neither of them felt the need for anything more elaborate. They'd both learned that true contentment had nothing to do with luxury. "Emily asked me something interesting yesterday," Jack said between bites. "She wanted to know if we could start our own charity someday to help kids whose parents are struggling." "Smart girl," Evie replied, smiling. "She gets that from her dad." Jack ducked his head, but she could see he was pleased. "I'm just grateful she's not going to grow up thinking help is something to be ashamed of. She's going to grow up knowing that everybody falls sometimes," Evie said, "and that getting back up is easier when you have people who care." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset through the diner's large windows. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, painting the world in warm, hopeful colors. "I never thought I'd feel this peaceful," Evie admitted, pushing her empty plate aside. "For years, I was so angry about what happened to me. But now you're exactly where you're supposed to be," Jack finished. "We both are," she agreed, raising her coffee cup in a small toast. To new beginnings, Jack clinked his cup against hers. And to old friends who help us get there. Outside, the last rays of sunlight faded into dusk, and the diner's neon sign cast a gentle glow through the window. In its soft light, two people who had once been strangers, then allies in desperation, sat together as friends, sharing the quiet joy of having found their way home. A young mother pushed through the mall's entrance, clutching her toddler's hand. Evie recognized that same worried look she'd seen on Jack's face months ago. Without hesitation, she stepped forward to greet them. "Welcome to our community day," she said warmly. "We have lots of resources and activities for both you and your little one." Jack watched from his desk, his heart swelling with pride. The community center space, once an empty storefront, now buzzed with energy. Volunteers set up tables with job listings, financial counseling materials, and even a small play area for children. "Can't believe how far we've come," the mall's head custodian said, walking up beside Jack. "Remember when you first started here? Look at you now, suit and tie." Jack laughed, straightening his crooked tie. "Still learning to wear it properly." He glanced at the growing crowd of families filtering in. "But you were right about hanging in there." The mall owners arrived, their presence no longer intimidating to either Jack or Evie. Mrs. Chen, the senior owner, beamed at the turnout. "This is exactly what we envisioned when we started this program." People filled the chairs set up for the presentation. Jack noticed Emily sitting in the front row, her homework spread across her lap. She'd insisted on coming straight from school, not wanting to miss her father's big moment. Evie stepped up to the podium, her confidence evident in her steady stance. "Welcome, everyone. A year ago, I stood in this mall wearing a different uniform, watching people struggle alone. Today, we're building a community where no one has to face their challenges in isolation." Her eyes met Jack's, and they shared a knowing look. The memory of that first night, when she'd offered him a simple sandwich, felt like a lifetime ago. Jack took his turn at the microphone, his voice clear and strong. "This outreach program isn't just about providing resources. It's about dignity. It's about hope." He paused, looking at Emily's proud face. "I know because I've been there. Sometimes life knocks you down so hard you think you'll never get up again. But with the right support, you can rebuild." The audience nodded in understanding. Some wiped away tears. Others reached for their neighbors' hands. Local business owners spoke about job opportunities. Financial advisors explained their free counseling services. Social workers detailed available assistance programs. Through it all, Jack and Evie worked the room, connecting with people, sharing their stories, offering encouragement. During a break, Emily ran up to Jack, throwing her arms around his waist. "Dad, you were amazing!" she exclaimed. "Can I tell them about how we used to have dinner in the car?" Jack hugged her close, no longer ashamed of their past struggles. "Sure, sweetheart. Someone else might need to hear that story." Evie joined them, carrying 3 bottles of water. "Your dad's speech really moved people, Emily. He's a natural leader." "So are you," Jack replied. "Who would have thought the security guard who caught me dumpster diving would become my closest friend and partner in all this?" The afternoon continued with workshops and one-on-one sessions. Jack noticed how Evie handled each person with care, her past experiences with wealth and loss, giving her a unique perspective on both success and failure. A teenager approached Jack, shuffling his feet nervously. "Sir, I heard you used to own a business? Before it failed?" Jack finished gently. "Yes, I did. And yes, it was terrifying when it happened. But look around. Failure isn't final unless you let it be." Mrs. Chen gathered everyone for the closing remarks. The community center's walls, once bare, now displayed success stories and resource information. Children played in the supervised area while their parents networked and gathered information. "Today marks 6 months since we launched this initiative," Mrs. Chen announced. "Thanks to Jack and Evie's leadership, we've helped over 200 families access resources, find employment, and regain their footing." The applause was heartfelt. Jack felt Emily's small hand slip into his. Evie stood tall beside them, no longer haunted by her past wealth or the scandal that took it away. They'd both learned that true richness came from lifting others up. As the event wound down, volunteers began stacking chairs and cleaning up. The mall's corridors echoed with conversations and laughter, proof that what had once been just a shopping center had transformed into a true community hub. "Looks like a success," Jack said, helping to pack up the resource materials. Evie nodded, watching the last few families exchange contact information and words of encouragement. "We did good, Jack. Really good. The afternoon sun painted long shadows through the mall's skylights, but unlike the shadows of their past, these held no darkness, only the promise of another day to make a difference. The morning sun streamed through the mall's glass ceiling, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Jack Matthews stood in front of the community outreach office, his hand hesitating on the doorknob. Inside, the mall's executive board waited to meet with him. His heart thumped against his chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was excitement. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door. 5 faces turned to greet him, including Mr. Peterson, the head of mall operations. The older man's weathered face broke into a warm smile. "Jack, please, have a seat." Mr. Peterson gestured to an empty chair. "We've been reviewing the incredible progress of our outreach programs over the past few months." Jack settled into the chair, his hands folded in his lap. He thought about how far he'd come from that desperate night in the parking lot. The memory no longer filled him with shame. "Your work has been exceptional, Mr. Peterson continued. The food assistance program you developed has helped dozens of families, and your personal touch with the job training workshops has made a real difference." "Thank you, sir," Jack replied, his voice steady. "It means a lot to help others who are going through what I experienced." Mrs. Rodriguez, another board member, leaned forward. "That's exactly why we've called you here today, Jack. We'd like to offer you the position of Senior Director of Community Outreach Programs." The words hung in the air for a moment as Jack processed them. Senior Director. Just months ago, he'd been digging through dumpsters to feed his daughter. "This role would put you in charge of expanding our initiatives across all our mall locations in the state, Mr. Peterson explained. "We believe your experience and compassion make you the perfect candidate to lead these programs." Jack's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm honored," he managed to say. "Truly honored." After discussing the details of his new position, Jack left the office feeling like he was walking on air. He headed straight to the security wing, where he knew Evie would be finishing her morning rounds. He found her in her office, no longer a small security booth, but a proper space where she conducted her mentorship sessions. She was speaking with a young woman who looked close to tears. "Remember," Evie was saying gently, "your worth isn't measured by your bank account. Take it from someone who's been both a billionaire and broke. What matters is who you are inside." The young woman nodded, wiping her eyes, and gathered her things to leave. As she passed Jack in the doorway, she gave him a small smile. "Spreading wisdom again?" Jack asked, stepping into Evie's office. "Just sharing what I've learned," she replied, then noticed his expression. "Something's happened, hasn't it?" Jack couldn't hold back his grin any longer. "They're making me Senior Director of Community Outreach." Evie's face lit up. "Jack, that's wonderful." She stood up and came around her desk to give him a quick hug. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. You've done amazing work here." "Speaking of amazing work," Jack said, "I hear you're being recognized too. The board mentioned something about your mentorship program." Now it was Evie's turn to look pleased. "They want to make it official. They're creating a formal position for me as head of financial mentorship and personal development. Can you believe it? All those years of hiding my past, and now I'm using it to help others." Jack settled into one of her office chairs. "We've both come a long way, haven't we? Remember that first night?" Evie asked softly. "When I brought you that sandwich. How could I forget? Emily called you Mommy." Jack's voice grew thoughtful. "She adores you, you know. Yesterday, she told me she wants to be just like you when she grows up, helping people who are struggling." Evie's eyes grew misty. "That little girl has taught me as much as I've taught her." "Speaking of Emily, how did she take the news about your promotion?" "Haven't told her yet," Jack admitted. "I wanted you to be the first to know. You're the reason I'm here, after all." "No, Jack." Evie shook her head. "You did this yourself. All I did was offer a sandwich and some encouragement. Sometimes that's all someone needs, a little kindness and a chance to prove themselves." Jack stood up. "Hey, what do you say we celebrate? There's that new cafe down on the first floor, the one that hired 3 people from our job training program." Evie smiled, gathering her things. "Perfect choice." As they walked through the mall together, Jack noticed how different everything looked from a year ago. The same corridors that had once felt like symbols of his failure now represented hope and possibility. Every store they passed held a story. The bookshop that had hired a single mother from their program, the restaurant that provided meals for their food bank, the clothing store that donated professional attire for job interviews. They settled into a corner table at the cafe, and Jack couldn't help but notice how the young man behind the counter, one of their program graduates, stood tall and confident as he took orders. "To new beginnings," Evie raised her coffee cup, "and to sandwiches that changed lives." Jack added with a smile, tapping his cup against hers. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the mall come to life around them. A family walked past their window, and Jack remembered how it felt to be on the outside looking in. Now he was in a position to help others find their way back. "You know what the best part is?" he said finally. "Every time I meet someone new in the program, I can honestly tell them it gets better. I'm not just saying empty words. I'm living proof." Evie nodded. "And I can finally talk about losing everything without feeling ashamed. Because it's not about what I lost anymore. It's about what I found." "We both found something, didn't we?" Jack said thoughtfully. "Not just jobs or success, but purpose. And friendship," Evie added softly. "Don't forget that." Jack smiled, remembering all the late-night talks, the shared struggles, the moments of breakthrough and disappointment they'd weathered together. "Never," he promised. Through the cafe window, they could see the mall's central courtyard where their community events were held. Soon it would be filled with people attending their next workshop. But for now, in this quiet moment, Jack and Evie simply sat together, two friends who had found their way from rock bottom to solid ground, ready to help others make the same journey. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Matthews, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.